Nutrition Information Help Desk. With me, I have Faiz and Shabib. Faiz and Shabib, would you please introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Faith Nzioka. I'm unable to put my camera on. It has technical issues. So, but anyway, majority of you already know me. So I'm working with the GNC as a cluster coordinator in therapy response team. Thank you.
Shabib, you are muted.
Sorry, Antina. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Thank you very much, Antina. This is Shabib Al-Kubati, Information Management Specialist for Global Nutrition Cluster. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You already started introducing yourself by writing as a chat box. For those of you who joined just right now, please write your name, your position, and the country where you joining at the chat box. Today's session will be, as usual, a 2-hour session on the HRP process. This is the Genesis webinar series on the HNO HRP process. We already did the HNO webinars in English, Spanish, and French. Now we are starting with HRP 2024 process English webinar. We will continue doing these webinars in French and Spanish. In today's session, we will be covering, Shabib, can you move the slide, please? We will be covering these topics. We start with introduction and overview. Then we go to the scope of HRP and formulation of initial objectives. There are specific topics under that. We do also talk about conducting a response analysis, how the process looks like. Faith will be leading on that session. After that, I will take you through the sectoral response plan, the nutrition sector response plan process. And following that, we will be talking about some cross-cutting considerations. Faith will be presenting that session. And finally, I will briefly talk about the GNC support on the HRP and HNO process. So these are the topics we will be covering. As usual, between sessions, we have a question and answer Q&A session. If you have any question, you can post at the chat box and we'll be responding to the questions between sessions. Before we proceed, Shabib, can you quickly run the poll? We have a very brief poll. Shabib?
Yes,
Poll
Shan.
number 1.
Okay.
Poll number 1 on
Which of the following is
on
the
oh yeah. Okay, before we start the next slides, maybe it would be good to check to what extent everyone knows the steps of the HRP process. So let's do this poll and we proceed to the next slide. So far, we have 8 response, 10. Okay, let's see. You responded, majority responded that the process starts by defining the scope of analysis, and also the next majority is say the process starts with conducting response analysis. So we'll see in the next slide how the process looks like. So in this introduction and overview, I will briefly talk about the step of the HRP process, the tools we'll be using, and the reference documents. Next. Okay, so in the poll, you have seen which one of the following is the correct step for the HRP at the country level. First one, conduct a response analysis followed by strategic objective and then sectoral objective and activities, and finally estimating the cost of response plan. The other option was starting with the HRP, the scope of HRP, formulation of strategic objectives, conducting response analysis, and formulation of sector objective, and finally cost of estimate of response. And the third one, the third option was conducting response analysis, defining the scope of HRP, formulating strategic objectives, and formulating strategic objectives at sectoral level, and estimation of the cost. As you have majority have responded, the correct answer, as we will be seeing in the next slide, is starting with defining the scope of HRP rather than the response analysis. So here, a little bit difficult to see, but I will explain. So this is the HNO HRP process calendar starting sometime in June, and it continues till the end of the year. As you can see, the fifth step, where you see this green arrow, is where the HRP process starts. It starts with, apologies for just on the screen, it doesn't look visible to me. So it starts with the HRP scope definition and setting strategic objectives, then followed by the response analysis. We'll talk about it later on, what it looks like. And then we go to the sector specific objective and activities and costing. And finally, we come up with the cost of response. And finally, the HRP is published. And as most of you know, the HRP usually published during the global humanitarian overview launch, it's first week of December. So as much as possible, the intercluster level, it's hoped that the HRP draft will be available at the beginning of December. So this is the case for most of the countries, but some countries, usually there is a delay in the process. But overall, it's hoped that the process starts sometime end of July, beginning of August, and is expected to finish at the beginning of December. It starts with defining the scope of the process, the scope of the HRP, setting strategic objective, followed by response analysis. Then each sector goes to their respective sector and develops their sectoral plan. And eventually the cost of the response is estimated. And finally, the HRP is published at the country level. Next. So again, this is also a recap of what I just said. We can break this process into three major steps, just for the sake of simplicity and also for us to help you explain, because this makes it easier. One, the first step is more of intersectoral, and which focuses on setting a boundary for the response. And the second step is more of looking at the specific interventions and the target, and whether or not an activity or a response intervention should be included, or an area should be prioritized or not. This should be on the second stage of the process. The last stage will be obviously the sectoral component. So we'll be talking in this order. Next. So in terms of tools, from the GNC, as you know, we use the Global Nutrition Cluster HNO Pain and Severity Analysis tool. In the tool, we have a section for HRP targeting, and Shabi will be showing us how to do the calculation for targeting. We will not be using any other tool. We will be using the HNO tool, but there is a dedicated sheet for estimating target for your HRP. So we'll be taking you through the tool and demonstrating how you can use the tool to estimate the HRP target. Next. In terms of references, these are the main references you should be using. In the HNO webinar, we talked about the HPC 2024 facilitation package. It is available if you click on this link, and we'll put also the link at the chat box. And also by the end of the webinar, we'll be sharing you the material, and you can find the link to the 2024 HPC facilitation package. It has both HNO and HRP materials at the intersectoral level. And we have this second material, which I think not so many people may not know it, because it was published back in 2016. It is the GNC's material for guidance on HRP process. It has some tips on the nutrition emergencies in HRP. It's a very detailed document. We highly recommend everyone to take a look at this material, and we will be using some of the material content in the presentation today. And lastly, there is also OCHA material on strategic objectives and indicators. It's also a very good material to refer to. So you can take a look at these materials. In addition, also you can look at the GNC HNO PIN calculation tool, which has also a section on HRP. Next. Okay, so this is just an overview of the process. As I said, we start with the scope of the HRP and formulation of strategic objectives, and then we proceed to response analysis, and after we go to the nutrition sector response planning process, and finally we talk about the cross-cutting issues. And I do not see any question at the chat box, but if anyone has any question, please raise your hand so that we take a couple of questions before we proceed to the next session. Mabasa.
A necessary question, but I just wanted to find out if it's absolutely necessary to have any sector-specific engagements prior to engaging in actual sector-specific response planning activities. I mean, the earlier activities that are probably common across the sectors that are usually led by OCHA or through the ICCG. Would it be necessary for a bilateral or individual sector sort of like engagements before you actually start your own specific sector planning? I don't know if my question is clear.
You mean that it would be good if you clarify. So you mean, can the sector start the process before the OCHA takes the lead on leading the process? Is that what
No,
you
almost
mean?
like can you redo what OCHA would have done that is common across all the sectors, or it's not necessary? You could just start off where it becomes necessary for your sector to start the planning that is focused for the nutrition sector, as it were.
No, you should wait at you should start from the intersectoral level, because that is where you know what are some of the boundaries of the response, meaning in the similar to the HNO process where you set the scope of analysis. In HRP we have also the scope definition exercise where at the intersectoral level it's not just OCHA uh, as an agency decides, you know, the scope, but it's more of intersectoral exercise where you discuss about what are the people we will be considering for the response, which areas should be prioritized, and which kind of interventions should be considered. All these discussions happen at OCHA level, of course, with the input from the cluster. Then, after you have this clarity at the intersectoral level, then you proceed to the sectoral level. So you can do your preparation well ahead of the OCHA intersectoral discussion, but you have to wait the collective decision on the scope of the response and the strategic objectives before you proceed to the sectoral level part of the work. Yeah. Any question additional? Thanks. It's a good question, Mabasa. Thank you for the question. Joseph, you raised about, do you have tasks for each step in the process? Yes, we do. We are going to talk about in the next slide, actually, about that. We will take you more in detail of each step. Any other question? I think we can take one more question before I hand it over to Faith. Okay, so it seems there is no additional question. So with that, I hand it over to Faith.
I think, Anthony, you're going through the scope of the HRP. You've not yet gone through that.
It is me.
Yes.
Apologies. Okay, so we proceed to the scope. Yeah, sorry. So as I said, the first part of the process is defining the scope of the HRP and formulating the initial objective. The indicative timeline, as you have seen in the HRP calendar, is starting from August and usually is expected to be completed in September. So as Joseph was raising the question, this step has also three sub-steps. We start with defining the scope of the HRP based on the HNO. And after that, we do draft preliminary intersectoral strategic objectives. And under the strategic objectives, we develop the specific objectives. And this process involves the participation of inter-cluster coordination group, meaning all clusters participate. And of course, OCHA coordinates the process. And also we involve subject matter experts they can be drawn from different sectors. And of course, depending on the country context, sometimes you may invite also planning, programming staff, especially from major agencies who can contribute to the discussion. And ideally, as a matter of AAP, you are expected to involve the affected communities, but practically doing that will be challenging. But this is something that everyone should consider because AAP is part and parcel of every step of the HPC process. Next. Okay, so as I said, the first step of the process is defining the scope of the HRP based on the analysis of the needs and risk. So what the main assumption here is that all people identified as people in need during the HNO phase are considered to be in need and requiring humanitarian assistance. So by definition, these people 100% should be considered for HRP. However, as in reality, as you know, there are capacity constraints and severity and magnitude of need varies, because that's why we do have severity classification. As you know, in the HNO step, we have different levels of severity, and also the magnitude of need varies from part of the country to the other, and the needs could vary also by population groups. For example, IDPs may have more need, maybe residents population may have less need, and even there is variation. There could be some variation between different host populations or resident populations. So at this stage, we'll be looking at the various aspects of the need and to decide who should be actually included for the response. Yes, there is a clear acknowledgement that everyone who is identified as people in need is considered for response, but because of resource constraints and capacity constraints, it's very difficult to provide assistance to everyone included in need analysis stage. So some of the considerations for doing the scope of the HRP, we look at, for example, the magnitude of need. This is simply the PIN per certain administrative regions. Usually we look at areas with higher concentration of need. We do also look at the severity of need. Some areas in maybe severity 4, severity 3, or severity 5, usually we consider them the first priority, but areas with less severity, like areas with severity phase 1, are considered maybe the second priority. And also we do look at the intersectoral level, where are the needs overlapping among the different administrative units. And also we look at the likelihood of the situation deteriorating during the course of the HRP response. And we look at also what is really driving the situation. Of course, in the HNO stage, we did say that we do look at needs regardless of what is the main driver. But when you look at the HRP, we mostly focus on needs which are attributed or driven by most recent crisis, so that at least we can address the temporal causes or transient causes of the need. So taking all these considerations, the intersectoral group determines the scope of the HRP. And the final output of this process is more of prioritization, identifying those areas that need to be prioritized for the HRP, population groups, and also areas defined by the severity of the situation, and also looking at the risk of deterioration. We identify subset of population from the HNO. Next. Once we know the subset of the population of the HNO, meaning some proportion or some part of the HNO population is now considered for HRP, then the next step would be defining the strategic objectives. The strategic objective is usually 3 to 5 strategic objectives. Well, we do not list like 10 or 15 or 20 strategic objectives. Usually it's 3 to 5 strategic objectives. We'll look at what sort of strategic objectives are considered appropriate in the next slide. And the strategic objectives, as much as possible, should articulate the intended improvements in people's lives, livelihoods, and also they talk about the right aspect, specifically on protection-related matters. And it's the objective, as you can expect. These are strategic objectives. This objective should be outcome-based. we don't usually use the process-based indicators. And in terms of time frame, we think about short-term to medium-term results. And these are results that would be expected to be achieved as a result of the HRP response. And so in formulating the strategic objective, the sectors use the coordinators and the information management colleagues will be participating in the process. When you do so, you need to take all these aspects into account, and as much as possible, you need to contribute your input towards the process. You shouldn't be thinking on sector-centric, more a siloed way, but you should have like intersectoral perspective at this stage of the process. Now we look at what good strategic objectives will look like. But before that, let us run again a quick poll, Shabib. Let's do the poll. Okay, so this is the poll about which one of the options can be considered as appropriate strategic objectives. So let us take about maybe 30 seconds or a minute and see if everyone understands what sort of strategic objectives we need to formulate for HRP country level. And you can give multiple answers. Okay, since majority of you have already responded, so we can end the poll. So 4 options. One talks about reducing mortality and morbidity, and second option talks about more of coping capacities and enhance affected people access to livelihood, self-sufficiency, and early recovery related needs. And of course, it talks about resilience. And the third option talks about reducing national poverty by 0.7% by the end of the response period, meaning usually the response period is 1 year. And finally, improving the living conditions and dignity of internally displaced people through provision of essential commodities. Okay, let's see. You have responded very well. Obviously, poverty reduction is not the strategic objective of HRP. Anything similar to things that has to do with reduction in poverty, these are more of a long-term goals, and they are very unlikely to be direct impact of the HRP. But anyway, let's see the common HRP strategic objectives in the next slide. Shall we next? Okay. So these are examples of good strategic objectives. These are taken from the HRP guideline, the facilitation package, which I referred to earlier. Usually, the strategic objectives cover life-saving, immediate assistance, basic services, recovery, and protection-related strategic objectives. And as you can see, this could be formulated a little bit differently, but overall, the idea is to highlight the main focus of the HRP is to saving life and providing assistance in a timely manner, in an urgent manner, and so that any strategic objective which highlights the immediate nature of the assistance is considered also a good strategic objective. And of course, the services that we consider for HRP are usually, they focus on basic services like healthcare, basic social services, education, food, shelter. All these are included in the basic services. So most of the strategic objectives, they focus on basic services. And of course, we tend to forget about resilience and recovery, but it should be one of the strategic objectives to be included in formulating intersectoral level overall HRP objective. And of course, protection is important component of HRP, and there is also protection mainstreaming aspect to it. And every sector should address protection matters in their strategic in their response. So protection-related strategic objective should be also included in the HRP. So the point here is for you as a contributor to the intersectoral level discussion in formulating the strategic objectives, you should play your important role at this intersectoral level discussion. So these are good examples which you have to keep in mind and suggest in the intersectoral discussions. Next slide. Okay, so once you set the strategic objectives, there is sometimes there is a third step, which is from going to more specific kind of strategic objectives. And at the end of this exercise, the scope definition and setting of strategic objective, you have the initial draft of strategic objectives. This could be modified maybe as you continue to the sectoral level. There could be also consultation with the humanitarian coordination team, with major partners, with donors, and there could be some adjustment strategy in strategic objectives. So the intersectoral coordination group finishes this part of the process, this step of the process, by drafting the initial strategic objective. Of course, you can also include sector level objectives, specific objectives under each strategic objective. Most of the time, these specific objectives tend to be more sector focused, I would say. For example, in saving lives, under that you may have a specific objective on maybe reducing mortality from pre-emergency level, or you may have sometimes treatment of severe acute malnutrition, or for treatment of acute malnutrition. You could mention some specific number. You may also mention about maybe some morbidity reduction. So under each strategic objective, there is also one, sometimes there is an inclusion of a specific objective, which are usually more sector related or intersectoral indicators, but which can be applied to various sectors like morbidity and mortality. are a good examples under saving life. So once you finish this the specific objective and finalize the draft strategic objectives, then the next step will be what phase we'll be talking about. It's response analysis one. Next slide, Shabib. So before I hand it over to Faze, I see there is some question posted again. Yeah, by Joseph, and I also see Kibrom Sand. Okay, Kibrom, go ahead, and I will address Joseph's question. Kibrom, over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. Hello, everyone. I think my concern is we need to be very, carefully in the identification or selection of the word during the strategic objective statements. I'm not in favor of ensure access. There is one, you can go to the examples that he gave. Instead of ensure, because as we are working in a very, but take into consideration the complexity and the risks, I think ensuring, we cannot ensure what, or this access, for example, that's based on the example. So instead of, this ensuring, let's avoid this issue. This is my opinion. So that, but we can have improve, we can replace by improve or increase access and so on, because this ensure, we cannot commit ourselves in the planning stage. Thank you.
Okay, I hear you, Kibro. Yeah, these are actually examples which are highlighted in the global guideline, and yes, I respect your recommendation. But if you ask me my expert opinion, I regard them as a good example because ensuring access to the most at risk, the most vulnerable in emergency it falls under the mandate of the humanitarian community. And it doesn't mean that we have control over everything, but the objective is meant to highlight that this is ultimately our main responsibility to ensure that everyone has access to the basic services. But are there some limitations? Yeah, obviously, even none of these objectives you can fully achieve, but at least this could be considered more of aspirational kind of objective. And of course, we have to be as ambitious as we can with some reasonable limits. But again, these are some semantic related issues. Maybe there could be some adjustment. I'm not 100% opposing your view, but I'm just highlighting that I do not see there is really any contradiction with our mandate in ensuring access to basic services as humanitarians. Joseph?
Thank you very much, Anthony, and thanks, colleagues. Thanks for your presentation. I'm just a little bit concerned when nutrition cluster is providing this HRP process, and I see we take good examples of strategic objectives that include, for example, getting educational services or health and protection. You don't see nutrition standing out. It's a concern because nutrition is most times neglected. I've been to countries where you struggle to get OCHA to recognize nutrition, even to start anything. So it's good let's fish out for examples that have nutrition in them and that they have taken and bring it to the fore so that we get to promote ourselves. If we don't have examples that include us, then where are we going? Over.
Yeah. And Joseph, these are not meant to be sector related sector specific indicators. These are overall strategic objective. Like usually life saving covers the nutrition, the health, the usual suspect is the life-saving clusters. Not everyone likes this terminology, but anyway, the life-saving strategic objective covers nutrition, health, and also acute food security. So usually we don't mention like how many children will be treating, what the level of reduction in GAM will be achieved by the end of the HRP at the strategic objective level. As I mentioned, sometimes we may be given option to include a specific objective under strategic objective. That is where we can more specify the objectives to be more sector specific. But the strategic objective, 100% always, they should be more of intersectoral in nature, like reducing mortality and morbidity is nutrition related. The main objective of nutrition response is to reduce morbidity and mortality and ultimately save life. It 100% is related to nutrition. But should we mention nutrition specific objective here? No, usually it's not recommended because every sector comes up with their own objective and it loses the value of being strategic and it will become more of sectoral objective. But we have a dedicated section within the HRP where each sector can clearly articulate their sector specific objective. Okay, Abdullah.
Yes, my question about if there any like a bank for the objectives, strategic objectives and specific objectives, because sometimes we confuse and be overlapping between the specific objectives and between every strategic objectives. So if there any maybe Excel or list to guide us about this to avoid the confusing and overlapping in this matter. Thank you.
The HPC package, which I referred to as the main reference material, it guides the process. So any explanation on how to formulate these strategic objectives is detailed in that guideline. So if you look at that guideline, you get a better idea on formulating and how to formulate the strategic objective. So there is enough guidance. And in addition, also I showed some OCHA reference material about the sector level strategic objective, which can be included as a specific objective under strategic objective. So there is a reference material which we can share by the end of the webinar, and also we are available to help you in one-on-one basis. That's why this is just an initial orientation. We will, as usual, we organize one-on-one session with each one of you based on request. And there is one more question from John. John, you raised about should the need and response plan for refugees always be added within HRP or as annexed based on the decision at the country level? Yes, it is a decision at the country level, and also it has a global aspect of it. If usually the refugee crisis, migrant crisis it tends to be a regional one, and usually they have the RRR refugee response, regional refugee response plans. I am sure in some countries, I think we have the Horn of Africa, we have also the Latin America. I think there is also some Great Lake regions. So depending on the region, usually there is a regional refugee response plan. In that case, the HRP of specific countries may not go in depth to the HRP, highlighting the refugee needs. Of course, there is a mention of refugees, but also there is the financial aspect. Even setting targets sometimes could be optional. So there is a country level decision on inclusion or exclusion of refugee response. But again, it doesn't stop it from highlighting the refugee needs, the refugee situation in the HRP. But the financial estimate, and also the specific target sometimes is either annexed or reflected in regional refugee response plan, the RRR response plan. And in some cases, if there is no way to reflect the refugee response, then they are included in the country level HRP. It's a good question. Thanks. Okay, with that, thank you for questions, very important questions. We move to the response analysis, and I hand it over to Faith.
Thank you, Antene. Faith Nzioka speaking here, and I'm happy to take us through the response analysis section. And as usual, we are starting with a poll just to ensure that we are alert. I know 2 hours is not short, so yeah, thanks, Shabib. You can see a very simple question. Can take around 1 minute to respond to. It is very likely that cluster partners will cover or respond to all needs and gaps that are identified in the HNO process. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or you do not know? Is it very likely that cluster partners will cover everything that we have identified in the HNO process? Three more seconds. I see some people are not yet. You can say you do not know. It's good for all of us to participate. Okay. You can close the poll. Majority of us have responded, and I can see, yes, 2 of us have said yes. It is very likely that we are going to cover, all the needs. Yeah, but majority have said no. Okay, it's not likely. And I think Hantene at some point also mentioned about this, and we'll be able to see this during the response analysis in more details. So the correct answer is what? Is no. Okay, but maybe maybe the 2 people who responded yes, maybe in their context it has been possible. Okay, so yeah, it may depend from one cause to another, but in most cases it's not possible to cover everyone. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, Shabib. Okay, so following the establishment of the strategic and specific objectives of the response, at the intersectoral level, we are still at the intersectoral level. We are not yet at the sectoral specific response analysis. So we are supposed to conduct what we call the response analysis. And here we have 2 main activities, prioritization and targeting. So as we have seen from the poll, it is unlikely that all needs from the HNO and all identified gaps will be covered in the response. So clusters should conduct a prioritization exercise for the response. So what we are doing here is to identify who are the priority groups for the response, which interventions should be prioritized, strategies and the modalities to deliver the services, including the priority geographical locations. So the response analysis will result in the identification of the interventions to be implemented and who will eventually benefit from them. That is who, where, with, and what. Okay, so let's see more details in the next slide. So the main reason for prioritization is to ensure that the clusters focuses on the high impact priorities. And as we all know from experience, the prioritization process can be a complex and sometimes controversial exercise. And therefore, we have 3 basic parameters which we need to apply to keep the process as clear and as transparent as possible. And this is how is the response appropriate, how is it relevant and feasible in meeting the humanitarian needs for each specific objective. And please note that the 3 parameters are presented separately, but it's expected that in practice, that these are generally conducted simultaneously. Appropriateness is the first response analysis step in the prioritization exercise. And this is to identify interventions that are most likely to meet the humanitarian needs, given their severity, magnitude, causes, and trends, as mentioned earlier by Anthony. So the intervention should prioritize, you prioritize what should be able to meet the specific objectives of the clusters as derived from the HNO. Also, the intervention should be non-duplicative of or complementary to other plans by the government, either humanitarian or development. Okay, so you should consider also what the Red Cross, the other development actors are doing. As you remember, in the JAF process, one of the IASC PIN divination criteria is that PIN includes all people who are in need, regardless of if the response is or will be provided by the government, civil society, or any other actor. So it is very important to ensure that the response matrix considers all actors responding to the needs to ensure there is no duplication of efforts, but actors are complementing one another to fill the gaps. And also, it's important to note that the interventions should be appropriate to contribute to accountability to affected people by considering their own prioritization of needs and response. The second step is relevance, and this is very simple, refers to the extent to which interventions address the priorities and preferences of our population. And the third step is the prioritization process should be, based on feasibility review, okay, which should provide a clear understanding of what interventions can be delivered within the time frame of the response plan. And this should be based on the constraint that the clusters are facing. So if, most of the time you find response plans are for 1 year, but sometimes you find we also have some other, response plans for 6 months or, different time frames. So whatever you're trying to prioritize, is it possible to do it? So the feasibility analysis is based on common constraints such as logistical challenges, market functionality, support systems, capacity, legal, political, security, and any other constraints based on your context. As this response analysis is happening at intersectoral level, okay, it is expected that the prioritization process articulates intersectoral and multisectoral response approaches based on resource from response analysis and prioritize interventions. Okay, and this is based on some of the factors that we've already seen, like based on severity, time criticality, and complementarities and synergies across different clusters. And it's also important at this point also to clarify that as this process is happening at the intersectoral level, that is at ICCG, a specific cluster should be, in parallel initiate preparations for the prioritization process in their specific clusters. I think at some point someone asked about that. So as this is happening, you should also be able to, to start thinking how this will also, be applied or aligned with the specific sectoral prioritization process. Next slide, please. So as indicated earlier, it's very unlikely that all needs will be covered in the response plan. Therefore, clusters are required to undertake the targeting process. And this entails quantification of the number of people eventually targeted, which is made as an outcome of the appropriateness, relevance, and feasibility review that we've just seen in the previous slide. So the estimated target may be the same as the number of people in need, maybe for some interventions, or it may be lower already if the appropriateness review has identified other humanitarian and development plans that can cater for some of the humanitarian needs. So as such, people targeted is a subset of PIN, and it represents the number of people humanitarian actors aim to assist during the planning period. And it is generally expected that the number of people targeted will be equal to the number of people reached once the response is completed, unless, we have some unforeseen situation changes or new operational or funding constraints that come along the way. So it is very critical while we are doing prioritization and targeting to balance aspirations with reality based on the limited resources and other constraints. So in some cases, maybe you may find, maybe you find the cluster lead agencies, when it comes now to very to the sectoral specific targeting, where they say we want to have maybe all the PIN to be also the target for some interventions, and maybe that can be tackled at that point. So at ICCG level, estimate population initial targets per specific objective. So these are initial targets, estimates at the intersector level, as we expect to have the final target when clusters do sector specific targets. For nutrition, we have, I think this was mentioned earlier by Anthony, we have the nutrition humanitarian needs analysis calculator that we can use for admin level prioritization. And also we have a tab that can be used for calculation of targets by applying coverage criteria agreed by partners, and mainly considers the food security and nutrition sphere standards, but countries are allowed to contextualize the coverage criteria as needed. And at this point, I will give the floor to Shabib so that he can take us through the nutrition humanitarian needs analysis calculator. Thank you. Unless we have questions, maybe we can have questions later, or you want, maybe we can have the questions later after we have the calculator. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. And hi, everyone. Yes, this is the tool. It is called Nutrition Humanitarian Need Analysis Calculation. Okay, this tool, you can find it in different languages. For example, in English, French, and Spanish. You can change the language from here. And as it is explained before, it is for two things. It is for severity ranking. That means you can find here which scenario you are, if scenario 1 or scenario 2 or scenario 3. And the second one is the population figures. So after you enter your information here, for example, the administration level, the population children population figure and children under 5, and subcategory for children, for example, 6 to 23 months or 0 to 5 months, also for pregnant lactating. If you enter this information for SAM, MAM, also BLW, incidence factor, and the target, I mean this coverage, you will find it will be automatically calculate for you this bin. By the way, as mentioned by Antina in previous webinar in HNO, we are no longer use this terminology, for example, physical and mental or living standard, but to keep the same tool. So as most of the countries adapt to this tool, we just keep the same layout, but we will improve it maybe in the coming discussion with the team. But what we add for HRB, we add something it's called target per admin level. So we advise country to have the target per admin level, not just as a one figure. So automatically, once you fill this population figure, automatically you will find it will calculate for you the bin. After that, the target, it will appear here. If you want to modify the target, for example, you have here for some inpatient, maybe you want the target around 70%, you just write 70%, and it will be automatically calculate for you this one. This is for every indicators inside this one. For example, for CMAM or for IYCF, micronutrient, vitamin A, everything. So you can just, in the yellow color, you just update the figures. Some of you, they go more depth analysis. They can use another way, but it is back to the IM and the country. Because as I know, for example, in different country or scenario, like whole of Syria, every region or every hub, they have different percentage than other hub. So you can do it per row, or you can do it as a one figure. Once you finalize this one, for example, once you finalize this the target, it will be automatically in the bin total, the last sheet. You can see, for example, for every indicator, you can find female, male, and the totals, also the target, and for all indicators of nutrition, and here it will calculate for you the total bin. And whenever you start the project, you can make it as a monitoring and evaluation form. So if you have, for example, reach a percentage or number, you can add this number to here, and you can compare your reach against target and bin. I will give you just an example. For example, this is the dashboard. It will be look like. For example, you can find the dashboard for reflected these tools. So you can find, for example, here the admin level, and you can see what is the the bin, also the target. Also here, for example, you can find these maps. For example, you can see the severity ranking, or for example, you can find the density of people in need. Also, we have a good example from Yemen team. They designed, for example, to have a good reflected. This is for Kenya, but it is created by Yemen team, IMO. So, for example, you can find here in the map, whenever you click, for example, in any area, in this area, you can compare your reach against target and against bin. For example, here we can see the admission, and against target it is 63, against bin it is 47. Because of that, we are recommended all of you that when you select the target or when you're doing the target, do it per the admin level. So you can compare it after that per admin level, maybe admin level 2 or 3. So you can find where is the gap, not the in first level or as one figure. So this is the output it will be look like. So you can compare your result against bin and target per the lowest admin level. So thank you very much, Antina. Over to you.
Okay, we
Thank you,
can
Shabib.
now allow for questions. Yes, go ahead, Anthony.
No, you proceed and
Okay.
you finish
Okay.
this session. But one thing I would like to mention, of course, you would mention, maybe some people may be thinking, oh, within this two sectoral, because we are at the response analysis stage at the intersectoral level. As they have seen, there is a target estimation in the response analysis step, and you cannot have that figure without having parallel work on target estimation at the sectoral level. So I just want to highlight that point, but I leave it to you to wrap up this part. Thanks. Over to you, Faith.
Okay, thanks. We can start with Mabasa.
Thank you very much, Faith. Thank you, Shabib, for the tool. Thank you, Anton. I was just asking myself this question about the tool and the GF 2.0. Is there any kind of clarification that could be made for perhaps us to understand that the maybe commonality, or how they could both be used to smoothen the pin target calculation activities? That's my first question. Then the second one is to say, I think the timing is a bit very difficult for some of our technical focal point persons like IMOs in Asia. And I thought there must have been some consideration of bringing them on board, because then that could also help to make sure that we are well represented and will be able to make use of the support that you're providing right from the outset. But of course, I think we can always regroup and reach out bilaterally if we need support on this matter. Then lastly, it's more like a comment, and it's around the pin estimation. I would give an example of Myanmar in 2022, where the target, the pin was just over 2 million. The target was about 1 million. But then I think around the issues of achieving the target that had been set at that point, given a lot of other factors like access, funding, capacity, and so forth, the achievement was quite on the lower side of 20% of that particular target for that particular year. And then for 2023, the targeting was kind of deliberately, what can I say, adjusted so that there was a much more deliberate attempt to focus on areas that really need. And as such, that saw the target being halved almost to about 500,000. Since in 22 it was 1 million, in 2023 it was 500,000. But now the kind of very tricky situation that we found ourselves is that for some of the preventive activities of the cluster. It's almost like in some places, well, it's mostly the Rakhine area where the capacity to respond is quite good. The target is probably going to be surpassed. That's probably more than 100% achieved for the preventive activities, of course. But of course, when you look at the SAM and probably MAM, and probably because of such factors like a very constrained supply chain and so many other factors, it's also quite minimally achieved. So I'm just trying to put across to say, in that situation, how would you explain that very difficult situation where you make adjustments, sometimes to also have to explain well to donors that this is the situation that we have in terms of what was achieved for this reason and the other. But then when there's that huge disparity between the target and what's achieved, you probably come up with wanting to adjust. And yet after the adjustment, it has created a situation where one part of the activities has been overachieved and the other one has been underachieved. Just a comment, probably with a question inside, but I thought maybe I could also bring this to your attention and kind of understand some of the circumstances that we come across in some circumstances in other places. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mabasa. Yeah, those are good questions. And maybe we could start with the first one on the GHAV, how it is linked with the HRP. We know GHAV, it is for the needs analysis. Okay, it's not touching on the response plan. And I'm thinking maybe in the coming days we'll be seeing maybe the HRP package also being revised so that it can be as streamlined as the GHAV 2.0 looks like now. Okay, but maybe what I'll say, how we can see it linking up. Okay, you can see the GHAV 2.0. Okay, we are ensuring that we have our pins. Okay, we have the sectoral pin, we have the intersectoral pin at administrative level. Okay, and we are also expecting that the targets will follow the same administrative units of the needs analysis scope. Okay. And I think also Shabib has also tried to show that, because when we are doing our, our response analysis, or maybe the numbers reached, we usually show the pin, the target, and the numbers reached. Okay. So I think maybe that's one link that we can use for the GHAV. Okay. And also we have the last part of the GHAV showing the linkages and the patterns that are coming from sectors. Okay, so you're able to see where we have the most needs, where the sectors are converging. For me that's a very good. I find it very, very useful when it comes to the multi-sectoral response planning. Okay, but I think Anthony maybe can add on that when it comes to the GHAV and the HRP linkages. And do you have some additional points, Anthony?
Thanks, Faiz. A very important question. Of course, ultimately, the GHAV is meant to shape the response because HNO, the main purpose of HNO is to inform HRP, right? So any change that happens as a result of the introduction of GHAV 2.0, of course, it shapes HRP. And one good example, in addition to what Faiz mentioned, regarding intersectoral convergence and linkage is like even when I explain about the scope of HRP, I talked about this is based on the HNO. So the HNO right now, as a result of GHAV 2.0, when you set the scope of the need analysis, and also when you come up with sectoral and intersectoral PIN, there are inclusion and exclusion criteria. So the confusion over what is considered development and what is considered emergency or humanitarian has clearly been clarified by the GHAV 2.0. And I am sure most of you have participated in the webinar. We have criteria for deciding which needs are considered as people in need or humanitarian need or nutrition and emergency need. And there is also exclusion criteria, which is not considered for HRP response by extension. So in that respect, I think GF gives more clarity to the HRP process. And of course, Faiz mentioned about one important component of GF 2.0, which is the intersectoral linkage, which helps us also to improve the multi-sectorality of response, which has been a major weakness in the past. Over.
Thank you. And also in terms of timing of the webinars, we understand maybe some regions may not be able to attend because of the differences in timing. But as you've already said, we'll be having, one-on-one bilateral calls with countries as needed. So if there's any support the IMOs may need, Shabib and the rest of the agency team are available to provide some clarity as needed. And I have seen the challenges that you're also having in Myanmar. Maybe we could not tackle that here because every context is different. But we all agree that we will not be able to meet all the needs. Okay, we just expect that the more severe needs, okay, of the communities will be covered. But as we said, we have constraints that we cannot meet all the needs, and you've already identified some of the constraints in your context that are making you not to even, you could not do even 50% of the needs at some point. Then you went even to a quarter of that. Okay, but when you look at the HPC process, we also have some other other stages of HPC that also support maybe in terms of advocacy. Okay, some of these areas that we identified that are making you not to be able to meet even a quarter of the PIN. Okay, so you could maybe put those ones in advocacy strategies and all that. Maybe that's what I can say for now, but we'll be able to maybe come to you. We have some more understanding of the situation and how we can move forward together. Is that okay, Mabasa? Or maybe Hanten, you wanted to add some points on that? Maybe
sure. Thank you.
Myanmar?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So for this webinar, we expect both IMOs and cluster coordinators, even deputy coordinators to attend. So if there is any confusion on who should attend, I think everyone in the coordination team. And in terms of timing, yes, we found this time of the day to be more convenient for most of the regions. But anyway, we can arrange one-on-one session with your teams as usual, and we should be able to provide you more guidance on a one-on-one basis. Thanks.
Okay, we have Joseph, and I'm not sure why others have put down their hands. I hope maybe your questions have been answered along the way, but feel free to put your concerns on the chat as well. Yes, Joseph.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just 2 points where I usually see challenge in the field. One day of prioritization, you're talking about intersectoral, prioritization and response plan. In the end, in reality, you meet duplications happening out there, and also in the population figures used. At the end, there is most times confusion which population to follow, which not to follow. Over.
Not sure if I got your question right, but you were seeing the intersectoral prioritization and the targeting being a challenge. Okay, I didn't understand the question.
How
Maybe
do you
clarify.
prevent the duplications that we see in the field? And then secondly, population figures used most times in the end in implementation, challenges still come up with which population to follow. How do you prevent those? Over.
Yeah, I think in terms of duplication, I think we said that we don't need to duplicate what others are doing. Okay, that is one of the, when we are looking at appropriateness. Okay, so I'm not sure if maybe it's a duplication between clusters. Maybe what we are doing in nutrition, maybe another cluster is doing. I'm not sure about that, how it will, because we have, clear mandates on which interventions being done by who and where. Okay, and I think at the intersectoral level, those are the initial prioritization. As Anthony said, we are supposed to be in parallel. Sector should be already, preparing and thinking how this is aligning with the intersectoral process at the end of the day. So by the time you're going to sectoral processes, you have a clear understanding from the intersectoral processes, or the strategic objectives and the specific objectives and the prioritization and the targeting that we've already discussed at the ICCG level. Okay, so as we said, we'll also be able to see when it comes to the intersectoral collaborations. Okay, we know even who is doing what. Even if we are converging in a certain location, we know which sector is doing what. Okay, yes, we're in the same population group. Maybe, for instance, we're in the same location, maybe targeting as the same households, but we already know which sector is providing which services. And when it comes now to the specific sector, we know which partner is doing what, okay, and where, to avoid all those duplications, unless it maybe in some context it might be difficult. Maybe where we have maybe health and nutrition, maybe there's no clear mandates for each sector. But maybe you could give an example. Maybe I'm not sure if we have time for that, but maybe a clear example of how that duplication can happen, maybe between sectors. Yeah. Yes, Anthony.
Yeah, we are a little bit behind our schedule. I think some of these questions we will get opportunity at the sectoral level. Let us move to the sectoral level, and then we can address the questions. And we will have a chance for Q&A in the next session.
Sure. Maybe maybe some of them will be answered as we go to the sector response
definitely.
plan. Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Okay. Shall we move to the next session?
Yes, please, and then we can have the.
Okay, thank you, first a lot. Thank you, colleagues, for your questions. Let's go to the sectoral level, and you will get more clarity. Shabib, next slide, please. No, back. Okay, so the steps which we discussed already are more intersectoral in nature, but it doesn't mean that in parallel there is nothing happening at the sectoral level. There is a lot happening at the same time at the sectoral level, starting even from defining the scope of HRP, formulating strategic objectives, all the way to response analysis. Sectors, they do their work in parallel. They do consult with their partners, they look at the data, they look at their analysis at the HNO level, they look at also response capacity. A number of considerations which are highlighted in intersectoral level are also applicable at the sectoral level. Without the input of the sectors, OCHA or intersectoral level or discussion of or decision making or HCT decision making cannot happen. So you should be doing your sectoral level work at the same time also contributing to intersectoral level. So I'm very sure you are familiar, most of you are familiar with this process. So the sectoral level response planning exercise, part of it happens at the same time as the intersectoral response planning exercise is happening. So in terms of sectoral response plan, the sectoral aspect of the HRP, there are 6 important components that we usually focus on. 1, identifying priority interventions and population groups. This is similar to defining the scope of the HRP and defining the strategic objective. Is similar kind of exercise where we identify which areas, which population groups, what sort of intervention are more appropriate. And the next is we need to formulate our sector level objective based on the strategic objective. As I already mentioned, the strategic objectives are usually high level outcome level, more of intersectoral in nature, but under that, we have also a sectoral level objective. For example, treatment of acute malnutrition or provision of life-saving nutrition services could be nutrition sector objective. Ultimately, it contributes to saving life or reducing morbidity and mortality strategic objective, which is intersectoral strategic objective. So we do formulate a sector level objective. And of course, we should also highlight how we are going to respond. This is related to articulating the response strategy, the how aspect of the response. And of course, we look at the specific activities, the monitoring indicators, and for each activity also, we come up with estimate of people targeted. Earlier on, Shabib showed you how we use the tool. In that tool, you can go in detail of by administrative region, by population groups, and by sub-target groups within the vulnerable groups or the people in need. You have also specific services for a specific age group. So you come up with the people targeted for each activity, administrative unit, and the specific target group. And of course, the most important part of this, the sectoral level, of course, it applies to the sectoral level process is the intersectoral level process is estimation of the cost of HRP. Okay, let us go to the first one. I will take you through each one of these steps by explaining how we do it. So, identifying priority intervention areas and population groups. You use this. You make this decision on prioritization based on the evidence you have from mostly from the HNO. As you can see here, this is an example from Afghanistan, I think a couple of years back. As you can see, the severity map of the nutrition situation there, the acute malnutrition situation. And as you can see, there are critical severity areas. There are also serious critical areas and less severe areas. So if we are if we have to make prioritization, then we take into account the severity of the need. Of course, we look at also the magnitude of need. So based on this analysis of the severity, the magnitude, and also response capacity, and a number of other operational challenges, we can also identify priority intervention areas and population groups. So we have some discussion about this one in the intersectoral level. At the same time, we do the same exercise of prioritization, defining the scope of response at the sectoral level. You usually use heat maps, severity analysis map. Of course, we look at also the PIN. We look at also response capacity and other feasibility related analysis also comes in here. And based on this analysis, you identify our priority intervention areas and population groups. Next. The next step, as I've already mentioned, is formulating sectoral objectives. And these sectoral objectives should be aligned with the HRP strategic objective, which is intersectoral one. Next. So this is very straightforward. The question is how we can select good sectoral objective. We have a number of examples which I will be showing you in the GNC HRP reference document. But before that, let us do this quick poll to see the level of understanding among the coordination team. So Shabib, can you run the poll, please? Yeah, thanks. So which one of the following can be a nutrition sector HRP objective? Okay, I can see not everyone has responded, but for the sake of time, we have to move. So a majority of you have said reducing acute morbidity and also the risk of excess mortality as a response. As we will be seeing in the next slide, all of this can be used as HRP objective depending on the case. And some of you may be asking, okay, why like micronutrient deficiency status, or specifically like for example anemia is mentioned here, it could be the case. We tend to usually formulate our objective around acute malnutrition, but it can also be any of the nutritional deficiencies, any of the nutritional problems applicable to that specific area. So these are among a list of several objective options we have. We will see in the next slide. And also, and I highly encourage everyone to refer to the GNC HRP tips document, which has a list of strategic sectoral objectives, where you can see a number of options. So all of the above is a correct answer. Next, Shabib. Okay, so examples of sectoral objectives is exactly what you saw in the previous slide, but there are many, many, many more in the tips on nutrition interventions for humanitarian response plan. We share the link, the URL link to this document. You can find it on the GNC website. Please refer to this comprehensive document, which lists all the intervention or activities that are applicable for nutrition emergency. It lists out also the sectoral objective. So look at that material and refresh your memory of what sort of sectoral objective you can apply in your specific case. The main and important point here is the type of objective we said. It can be a general morbidity mortality related objective, or it can also be related to a specific prominent nutrition deprivation in that particular context. So you have option of combining, and also as you can see, ensuring predictable, timely, and effective nutrition emergency response. It is also related to coordination, and also it is related to how we do assessments and so on. So not only delivering particular services, it can also be related to coordination. Coordination is one aspect of the response exercise, which response interventions, which I will be showing you in the next slide. Next, Shabib. Okay, so once we formulate our sector objective, the next thing that we should highlight in the HRP document, either in a narrative form, usually this part is in HRP document narrative, we should highlight some of these examples. You could have more, but here the main message you want to communicate is how you are going to deliver the response. How are you going to implement your response activities? One option could be you can integrate usually within the healthcare system. You could also have a mobile health and nutrition teams depending on the need, depending on the context. You could also have intersectoral collaboration with other sectors. You can also explain in detail how that intersectoral collaboration works. And you may have also sometimes cash-based assistance aimed at reducing the risk of acute malnutrition. So this is also a way of explaining how the service will be delivered and what modality of service delivery would be, and whether there is a specific platform for service delivery. And all these things are detailed in the response strategy aspect of the HRP at the sectoral level. Next. Shabib, next slide. Okay, so now we talked about the strategic objective, the sector objective, and then followed by our response strategy. Then comes what kind of services we do provide actually. So we tend to select services which are focused on acute malnutrition, but there is a range of options for us to include. Here, as you can see, we have screening, inpatient management, outpatient management of some, mom treatment, PLNW, IYCF, including even older people nutritional status. Also in the next slide, Shabib, we have a list of other nutrition services like cash or voucher program for prevention of malnutrition, multiple micronutrient supplementation, iron, folic acid supplementation, vitamin A supplementation, deworming, zinc, calcium, nutrition care for HIV infected people. Next slide. And other supportive activities like cluster coordination. You may have specific activities even under that. You can have activity related to AAP. You can have activity on nutrition survey assessment and nutrition surveillance. All these are considered as nutrition response activities, either service delivery or supportive services like coordination and assessment and cross-cutting issues. So when you come up with your response plan, you need to consider all these activities depending on where they are relevant to your context. And the list, the detailed list, the description of those services, and also the indicators to be used, every detail is highlighted, indicated in the tips on nutrition interventions document. Next. Yeah, so again, as I said, in this document, I can also play the video, but for the sake of time, I can't right now. NI services, for example, or OTP, or outpatient treatment of severe acute malnutrition. You have example of objective, you have example of the different target groups, and also even example of indicator that you can use. And you can also discuss about the groups to include, and you can take these statements from this guidance to use it in your HRP narrative. Of course, you have to make some adjustment, but I would say there is enough guidance in this material. Please refer to it, and it would be useful for to guide you in the process. Next slide. Shabib, next slide. Okay, this one we already discussed. The reason I'm bringing it here again is as you set your target, you list out all these specific objective. Of course, you need to revisit your target. You make a adjustment. Sometimes also you are requested by OCHA to show your monitoring indicators, which Shabib already showed. They ask you usually baseline, target, and reached. And there is at the same time, while you formulate your sector specific activities and you set then that your target population, they ask you also what is the baseline and what is also the target, and you leave a column for reached. So this is also another opportunity for you to finalize that aspect of the work. Of course, in response analysis, the last stage of the response analysis is to come up with target population. By that stage, you will have contributed already your overall estimated target group. But at the same time, you should be also working on activity level target, and of course, OCHA requires you also to put the baseline and the targeted figures in your sector. So you use this tool, the tool that Shabib has showed you earlier on. And this is very straightforward. We cannot go in detail of how the calculations, the formulas, the the coverage rate we should be applying. All these discussions we cannot cover here. We suggest that you reach out to us bilaterally so that we can take you stepwise through the process and explain in your specific context which approach would be important. For example, for acute malnutrition, some treatment target setting, sometimes even for PIN, you use the incidence factor. The incidence factor can vary from country to country. Sometimes you have to set a target for your HRP, but the coverage of the response in some cases should be higher. For example, if your majority of your response is focusing on displaced people in a camp setting, your coverage should be very high, and you should also stick to the sphere standard for minimum coverage for that population. If your majority of your response is focusing on resident population, host population in a rural setting, your coverage could be as low as maybe 50%. So all these things, the specifics of coming up with a targeted population, I highly recommend that we have bilateral discussion, one-on-one session as usual to explain to you the process. And if you need also more clarity, we are happy to support you on that. Okay, let's move on. I see one question, but I will address it later on. So the last step of the process is the costing, and I will briefly discuss about how we do the costing, the options available. But quickly, can you just put as a chat box what HRP costing approach you used in 2023 in your respective country? There are a couple of options of doing HRP costing, but in your case, what options have you applied? What methodology you applied? Very quick response. Let's spend 30 seconds. What was your HRP costing approach? Did you submit projects? Did you do something else? Did you just calculate your financial requirement by your sector? How did you do that? Very quick response. Can you put your response as a chat box? What HRP costing approach was applied? Okay, I see John mentioned activity-based costing. Okay, so yeah, maybe we can go to the next slide and see what options are usually applied. So there are two main strategies and a third option. The first is activity unit-based costing, or is per capita cost kind of approach, where the cost for delivering an intervention, a specific intervention, is used, and that is used to estimate how much it will cost to a certain number of targeted population. So, for example, you may have a cost per individual for delivering IYCFE services or treatment of severe acute malnutrition or vitamin A supplementation, and you multiply that per capita cost with the number of people you targeted for that specific response. So that's simply activity-based costing or a unit-based costing approach. The other option is project-based costing. This is about applying more aggregate of the project total value submitted by cluster partners. What happens is every cluster partner is asked to, interested eligible partners are asked to submit their projects on online project system. Don't worry about it. Some of you may be familiar. If not, you have the link on the presentation so you can check what it looks like. So it's an online intersectoral platform where every cluster member submits their projects, and those projects are vetted, reviewed by the cluster, making sure that the strategy, the objective and the activities are well aligned with the sector objective and activities, and the projects are reviewed, prioritized, and selected, and the total value of all these projects gives you the HRP requirement for the sector. So this is a project-based costing. Another option is a hybrid option where both of these approaches are mixed. Maybe the cluster comes up with overall HRP requirement using activity-based costing, but later on asks cluster partners to register their project. They can submit their project for the sake of tracking the response, not for costing the response. So these are the three options that we have. Thanks. Next, Shabib. Let's do this quick poll. I know we are a little bit late because also we started a bit late. Let's do this poll. Shabib, can you run the poll, please? Yeah. Which one of the following is true about the HRP costing? So each one of the options I just mentioned, they have their advantage and disadvantage. Here is a question about which one is true about these costing strategies. Okay, so let us see the response. So the next slide will answer almost all of these questions, and you will see what the correct response is. Next slide, Shobi. Okay, the unit-based costing and project-based costing, they have their advantage and disadvantage. And unit-based costing, one key advantage of unit-based costing, it is less time consuming. Once the cluster partners agree on the more representative standard cost per capita cost, then it's a matter of just using those standard costs and coming up with overall financial requirements. So in that respect, it is less time consuming. Whereas project-based costing, it involves a lot of process, like involving review of project, is quality control is there, and there is also prioritization. It doesn't just happen in one day or two. It takes probably maybe a couple of weeks, and it's not easy step because every project should be developed by individual partners, and that also takes a lot of time. So because of that, it's relatively speaking, it takes more time than unit-based costing. Of course, both of these approaches promote improved strategic coordination, but more unit-based costing, it allows for, it gives the clusters to exercise some strategic coordination role, which is good in that respect. When it comes to the project-based costing, it is very helpful in making sure that there is coherence in sector response plans, because every partner submitting a project tries to align the project objective and activities with the sectoral level HRP objective and activities. So in that way, all the project submissions meet the sector set objectives and activities. So that makes it easier to ensure coherence among the response plan activities. The other advantage of unit-based costing is because it is more a sectoral level cost rather than agency level. So it eliminates the cost fluctuations introduced by the individual organization budgeting benchmarks. So we have more representative costing. Of course, that requires a little bit of question because costs may vary between organizations, where they are located, and so many other logistical issues as well. The other important aspect of project-based costing is it allows for financial tracking because projects are registered. You can see them on financial tracking system, FTS. So tracking how much funding you have received, how much funding gap exists is much more easier using project-based costing. In terms of disadvantage, unit-based costing, it doesn't necessarily involve a peer review exercise like the project-based costing. You can discuss, of course, whether the per capita cost is okay with every partner. If there is any, then you just get some consensus on the per capita cost, but it doesn't require you to go through a peer review process of each project. So in that way, it's a more simplified process. The difficulty is it is difficult to track the funding received and the activities. That's really one challenge with unit-based costing. The other important difficulty is intercluster activities. They are difficult to cost. There is no standard cost for delivering multi-sectoral, intersectoral intervention. So that's one difficulty. Project-based costing, as I mentioned, it could be time-consuming. It could be leading to under and overestimation of the funding requirement because different organizations use different standard of costing the response. So this is overall the options available. You need to weigh which is applicable to your case, and you should also contribute to intersectoral level discussion regarding what sort of costing methodology should be applied in your context. Next. Shabib, next. Okay, Q&A, and I see a question from Joseph about what costing approach is recommended. We do not recommend one or not recommend the other, but it depends on the context. If time constraint is the main concern, then you are, of course, opt for activity-based costing, or it depends on the specific context and also the time availability and also whether or not the country has experience of under-reporting on the financial report, the tracking system. Sometimes, and I have seen countries, even though they do unit-based costing, but the reporting on the financial tracking system, the project tracking seems not facing really a challenge. So in that case, using activity-based could be a good way rather than project-based. So it depends on the context. You have to consider all the options, the two options or a combination of these options. Some countries, they do both. I wouldn't say nobody has actually, even OCHA, global intersectoral level guidance on costing. There is no recommendation of a specific approach. So there is no really one recommended option. Okay, we take one question.
There was a question on baseline, whether baseline is the same as PIN.
Oh. Also, no. Baseline is not PIN. Baseline is baseline of the target you achieved in your most recent HRP. Usually that's what we use. Like the preceding year, if the HRP, the HNO is as the highest figure, of course, you are likely to have like the target reached in that year can be used as a baseline for the next year. But what if you are targeting less? Yeah, then you have to also make the adjustment. The baseline doesn't necessarily mean that it should be the highest number. It could be less number, but it should usually we use the preceding year HRP reached figure. Okay, any question? Okay, if not,
maybe I
okay,
can
see
go
one
ahead
more.
and finish, and then maybe we can have more questions later.
We
What do you
have
think?
John. Maybe we take John's question and we move to yours.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Anthony, and apologies if my question was addressed earlier. I was struggling a bit with connection. One, in terms of funding outlook for next year, of course, we were at the HCT meeting yesterday, and one of the requests from the HC was that we should be having some kind of cost of inaction to help us with advocacy for funding, especially in some of our contexts where we struggle to raise resources for the HRP. So my question is, do we have some kind of global guidance now to support estimating cost of inaction? So that's one. The other, I think in the GIF webinar, I think there was a presentation on estimating total PIN, which was more based on SAM and MAM or GAM. Do we have clarity now? Do we bring in back the preventive, IYCF, MNP, or that will be left to countries to decide? And then the last one, maybe for Shabib, the HNA calculator. Of course, at country level, of course, we disaggregate data into, by population, IDPs, host and returnees. So is it something that also can be done within the GNC HNA calculator, or you wouldn't want to have those details in there? Thank you.
Thanks, John. And I don't think I captured all the questions. Maybe you repeat the third question to Shabib. Regarding the cost of inaction, I am not sure there is a mention of that particular topic in the HRP guideline, but somewhere in advocacy documents there is a section on the cost of inaction, and we can share these advocacy resources. This is more of advocacy resource. Of course, HNO HRP in itself is an advocacy document. So yes, there is no really a specific guideline on that, but there is a section of the cost of inaction and how to articulate the cost of inaction as an advocacy message in HRP document or in other material. We have it in a different types of guidelines, so we could extract those documents and we can share with you. We have some examples on the cost of inaction. The other point is in terms of inclusion of the PIN. I guess your question is, are we considering other preventive activities to be included in the PIN? Yes, as I said, it is usually we tend to pick acute malnutrition related indicators for PIN and severity, but now we clarified that it could include anything that puts people's life in danger, in the risk of mortality and morbidity. So the GIF explains that very clearly. You can use, even for severity analysis, you can use IYCF, you can use micronutrient deficiency. You don't necessarily have to have GAM figure. So yeah, so we have option of that. Shabib, can you address the third question? I didn't hear it clearly, but you
Yes,
can
thank you.
respond
Thank you.
quickly.
Yes, Johan. Regarding the material need analysis regarding IDPs and returnees, for now it is only depend on one population figure. So if these population figures include the IDPs and returnees, it will be calculated. But if you want to separate it, IDPs and returnees, I will prefer to have another file. Okay, for to be more specific. You know, because we have a lot of column to calculate for one population figure. But if you need another for IDPs and returnees, you can do it as other file. After that, you can compile it in extra Excel sheet like this for now. But we will think about it, how we can include it in the same tool. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shabib. Okay, since we ran out of time, I quickly hand it over to Faith.
Sure, thank you. And actually, I'll not take a lot of your time. I will take 5 minutes for the next. Can we go to the next slide? I have only 3 slides, so maximum 5 minutes. We have a poll. It's just a very quick one, just to choose the statement which is true, and you can choose as many as you want. So please, 1 minute, and then we can go into the details. And this is in regard to cross-cutting issues. Kindly choose the statements which are true. Okay, we have 15 responses, and that is, I think, adequate if maybe just because of time. And the first statement, actually, I can see some people have said it's true, but this is wrong. Okay. When it comes to disability, we need to go beyond general statements on targeting of persons with disabilities. We need to describe concrete activities to address risk factors identified in the HNO. Okay, yeah, it's good to see those answers because they let us know how we are doing this when it comes to our specific countries. So the second statement, that is true. No single sector can meet all humanitarian needs. So we need to articulate multi-sectoral response approaches and allow sectors to collaborate and complement each other to fill gaps. Then the third statement in nutrition cluster, we are doing gender because our activities are focused on women and girls. That is not correct. Some of us are saying that is correct, but I think now we are moving to gender transformative programming, where humanitarian response, we need to have better understanding of gender roles and division of labor and develop programs that are informed and led by affected communities. For instance, when it comes to nutrition, interventions, for instance, like family work, the IYC programs, such as breastfeeding or complementary feeding education. We mainly focus on mothers who, on the other hand, social norms already put heavy responsibility on women and girls. So instead of burdening the mothers, we should rather consider working with the whole family unit to support the mother. Okay, that's just a quick example. And then HRP, I think that has already been mentioned a lot. That should be mainstreamed throughout the HPC process. So that statement is correct. Okay, next slide, please, Shabib. So this is just a quick reminder on key considerations for cross-cutting issues. We are not going into details, but just to highlight key important aspects for consideration. GNC has developed a general checklist on integrating cross-cutting issues in the HNOs and also in HRPs. They just reflect minimum considerations. They are not, exhaustive. So we expect countries to adapt as needed. We also have, the checklist is also accompanied by other specific guidelines and checklists for other aspects or other themes like gender, including the GBV, age, disability, AAP. We also have HIV/AIDS and interclusters and sectoral collaboration. And so based on the analysis of cross-cutting issues that you identify in the HNO, you are supposed to include objectives, strategies, and activities that will be put in place to address the identified cross-cutting issues of relevance for that context and ensure that all partners align with the cluster strategies. And at minimum, we need to include disaggregated indicators by age, sex, and disability as well. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, the last slide on this. So for the intercluster sector collaboration, most of the time we usually have collaboration between nutrition, WASH, health, and food security. But because collaboration is based on the needs, so any other cluster or sector can collaborate. So this is not just what we expect, but you can have more sectors or clusters coming together as needed. We also have a document on what is intercluster sector collaboration by GNC. So you need to follow the steps explained in that document to develop some ICSC activities along the HPC. And if you have agreed to develop such ICSC activities, we now have a new guidance on ICSC monitoring and evaluation guidance note, which will give you some examples of joint ICSC indicators, which you can include in your HRP. And if possible, write a joint paragraph on the ICSC in your HRP to make sure that this is well reflected across the clusters involved. So this is not something new, but just a reminder and also to show you some of the resources that you have to ensure that you have, these cross-cutting issues mainstreamed in the HRP. Yeah, and that's it from my side. Thank you.
Okay, so we will not be taking any question, but before we finish the webinar, I just want to highlight, as usual, we are here to provide support on a one-on-one basis. This is just an initial orientation to give you about an idea about how the process looks like this year, if there is any update, if there are any new tools and guidelines that are introduced this year. But overall, HRP has not changed that much as such. But in any case, in your specific context, you may need, we understand you need specific support. So feel free, as usual, to reach out to us on one-on-one basis. And our team will be providing the usual support throughout the HNO HRP process. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your active participation for contributing to the discussion, raising very important practical questions. And I also would like to thank my colleagues Shabib and Faiz for facilitating the session. And as usual, please reach out to us, and we'll be available to provide one-on-one support. So with that, we end today's webinar, and thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day and the week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.